Chapter 531. The Contradictory Fate _3. Within the emptiness, two streaks of light swiftly darted by. Compared to the world within, both Lane and Nyx had noticeably declined in their speed of progress and the imposing aura they gave off. This wasn't due to excessive consumption of energy, but because here, the existence of the world undoubtedly seemed very faint. In the classical philosophy of the East that would emerge in later generations, there was a saying, "The Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things." But if even the Tao ceases to exist, then many things built upon it would also lose their significance. It was like characters in a game becoming detached from the game itself. They would just be a bunch of meaningless code. Thus, when the existence of the world was diminished, everything built on the world's rules would naturally weaken as well. Compared to Nyx, however, Lane fared a bit better, since he himself possessed a part of the power that could anchor existence. The streaks of light continued to travel, and after an indeterminate amount of time, the existence of the surrounding emptiness finally became clear again. Yet compared to the environment of Chaos World, this place bore a slight scent of a foreign realm. However, this sensation precisely confirmed that they were heading in the right direction. Consequently, as their own power gradually returned, they increased their speed, until suddenly, the sound of collision and friction from those origins thunderously filled the air. A conflict between destiny and order? Halting in the emptiness, Nyx looked towards the distance. There, it seemed as if something both infinitely large and infinitely small existed, yet she could see no tangible thing. That was their target, but compared to the clearly visible, river-encircled chaos, this world appeared to be shrouded in shadow. This was Hemenu, and its name was derived from its distinct world structure. The core of it was divided into 4 layers, from inside to outside, each layer having positive and negative sides. They were collectively known as Hemenu, also called the 8 primordial spirits by the intelligent life within the world. In the outermost layer of this world was the absolute void, symbolic of a space where the world's power could radiate to but which in itself had no existence. The second layer was the boundless darkness, thinkable as the protective outer coat of the world, preventing all internal and external interaction. The third layer was the infinite space, the emptiness that bore everything within the world, facing the emptiness of the outer world. And at the very core was the primordial water, from which all matter and deities of the entire world were born. In such a case, from the outside looking in, one would naturally only notice nothingness and darkness, unable to see anything else. Yes, a conflict between order and destiny. Do you remember what I said before? The chaotic gods will not truly enter this world. Not that they cannot, but the world will not permit them, and what's happening now proves that my thoughts were not wrong. Nodding her head, in the emptiness surrounding Lane, there were specks of twinkling lights, the location of the chaotic gods. They were supposed to dive directly into those deep, immeasurable darkness, but now they had all stopped here. They've come too early, Nyx. The timeline of our world is many years ahead of the original destiny. Maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands. No one knows exactly how much earlier. In any case, the foreign realm that should have been nearly completely devoured still retains a significant level of resistance, and destiny has not realized this. Moreover, in the midst of this, the integration of the 9 realms has even exacerbated the problem. After all, in the long term, the remnants of the 9 realms will indeed strengthen the mass of chaos, but in the short term, it has caused the world to have to devote a considerable amount of force to digest this gain. So, just as the present world does not wish for true gods who hold authority to enter the abyss beyond their control, chaos also does not wish for the representatives of law to enter a foreign realm it has not yet completely mastered, because this could very likely be a one-way trip. Reflectively, Nyx roughly understood the reasoning behind this. Indeed, if chaos had an absolute upper hand, then naturally it could throw the gods into it, acting as the final straw to break the camel's back. But now it was a war between 2 nations, with one side losing cities and lands, yet its core remained unscathed. At this time, deploying forces deep into the enemy's core without any backup was uncertain in dealing damage. But it was certain that those who went likely wouldn't return. Gods are indeed immortal, but that's assuming their opponents are not another world. And what about Io? And since there's a problem, would they just keep being at a stalemate like this? Io is immortal, and although she holds a certain position in destiny, her existence or absence wouldn't really affect the world. As for the gods, hesitating for a moment, Lane spoke faintly. I don't know, perhaps time will give the answer, but I have a better solution. After all, Nyx, look, since the Heminu world still has some strength to spare, how am I to enter it? This indeed posed a problem, as Lane knew with certainty that he wouldn't be able to breach that boundless darkness on his own. Thus, during the conversation, Lane's gaze turned toward one of the closest orbs of light. That was Athena, the beacon of wisdom and victory he had followed all the way here. Chapter 532, The Rising Sun. Lying sideways in the void, enveloped by an invisible force. Her black hair hung down unconsciously, and at this moment, Athena no longer exuded her usual heroic air, but rather resembled a tranquil sleeping beauty. However, the two present were indifferent to this beautiful scene. Nyx even regarded the other with a scrutinizing attitude for a long time, yet still could not discern Lane's intentions. You intend to send her into a foreign realm? Although I do not know what connection you have with her, or by what means you plan to circumvent the barriers of worlds, I have to remind you. To a world, it does not care who brought in the outer deity. It only sees it as a threat, one to be transformed if possible or destroyed if not. I know, moreover, as a true god-born immortal, Athena actually cannot enter. Just like she is now, struggling with the fate originating from herself, chaos would not send its power into the belly of another, so the living cannot be sent. With a slight smile, Lane reached out with his right hand towards Sleeping Beauty's forehead. A pearly light shimmered faintly, and the invisible force stopped the advance of his finger. But due to the struggle between oneself and oneself, this power of the world showed a gap. Part of it wanted to send Athena in, while another part wanted to keep her here. Lane, with a kind heart, couldn't bear to see such a self-destructive act, and fortunately helped to compromise. If one couldn't be sent in completely, then send in half. If the living cannot enter, then let the dead take her place. If those with authority could not leave, then let those without it embark on her behalf. At first, there was a wisp of fog, followed by millions of threads pouring out from Athena's brow. Nyx, standing aside, recognized those threads' nature at a glance. They were not souls, nor even recognized by the world. They were merely a segment of already dead fate. Click. In the depths of the cosmos, a faint sound echoed as the true name of Pallas Athena was being split. The portion of her fate meant for her brother, the proud lord of divinity, from now on had nothing to do with the goddess of wisdom anymore. After all, if not for Zeus swallowing his wife, if not for the subsequent sacrifices, they should not have had such a connection. See, she is the most suitable candidate. The fate that wanted to send Athena into Heminu's script has been fulfilled, and the world itself has prevented an immortal deity from falling into the heart of a foreign realm. And now that a part of the script has been fulfilled, fate will no longer struggle so fiercely against the world itself. And soon, other deities will no longer remain here. So only you, Nyx said. Only you can leave an anchor in this world while all other deities will be excluded. Then what am I here for? Her voice was light and airy, like the ever-shifting form of the lady of the night's black gown, with no one knowing what she was truly thinking. She seemed to express dissatisfaction, yet also not. However, Lane just smiled, for in his heart, Nyx's true purpose lay within chaos. But this was not without use here either. Since he had summoned her, naturally, he also owed her a bit of compensation. Help me hide the essence of this soul. I reckon Io was discovered the day she entered the world, but he cannot be discovered so early. Then, as a medium, you two will form a connection with him, and when this world fully collapses one day, you will receive your reward through it. In any case, the Heminu world was far smaller than Chaos, and its collapse was predestined, a fact both were well aware of. Meanwhile, as they spoke, Lane's fingertip mingled with the fog of fate. Along with the flash of thread-like light, a brand new soul began to be constructed in front of the two. But this scene lasted only a brief moment. When the soul was half constructed, the change ceased. One half created by me, and the other, let this world complete it. Releasing his hand, the ethereal soul trembled slightly. The fate that had shrouded Athena as if finding another object to cling to, began to shift naturally. What is that? Suddenly, Nyx pointed to the foreign domain shrouded in darkness up ahead. There, a golden pinpoint of light had started to flicker at some unknown time. The hierarchical structure of the world seemed unable to stop it. It was incessantly breaking through towards the outside. A native deity, it seems, a god of sun, much more potent than the god of son of chaos. After discerning for a moment, Lane roughly recognized the identity of the newcomer. That should be Ra, just uncertain as to which era's Ra it was, whether it was the complete Amon-Ra or not. In that case, even without me, the gods wouldn't remain in a stalemate here. After all, once this outer god notices them, battle becomes inevitable, and then the self-preserving power of the world will overcome fate and drag these deities back. Making this judgment wasn't particularly surprising. The world's will, though rigid, wasn't to the point of being stuck entirely. In any case, it would gradually resolve this issue. As for Ra, Lane was quite willing to get a preview of his level of power. Although the Hemenu world was far inferior to Chaos, Ra was the only supreme deity, unlike their own world with not just one primordial deity. In this situation, it was difficult to say just how much power the other party possessed. Chapter 533, The Rising Sun _2. In the endless sands of Hemenu, within the Nile River Valley, above the city of Heliopolis, amidst the eternally burning celestial bodies, the sun moved across the world. Normally, it was just an avatar of Ra that managed all this. But today, silently and unbeknownst to the deities of Upper and Lower Egypt, he had taken the place of his own incarnation. For not long ago, Ra had once again felt the panic brought by that dream whose content he could not quite recall. Thus, he did not bother to prevent the upcoming revival of the Chaos Serpent, Apep, and instead came here at the first opportunity to survey the mortal realm beneath his feet. He paid no attention to anything else and instead watched those humans who did not fit in with the Egyptians. Many of them had become slaves, marked with the symbols of disgrace, while others, though free, engaged in the most arduous and heavy work. Still, others could not bear oppression and enslavement. They wandered in the dark alleys or the streets at night, sustaining themselves through theft and robbery. This was naturally regarded by the Egyptians as the vile nature of a foreign tribe and led to further oppression towards them. All of this originated from a command by Ra, but he felt no pity for them. On the contrary, he was observing the existence of these mortals inch by inch. As time passed and their bloodlines thinned, these people who called themselves Hebrews no longer carried such a marked foreign aura and had slowly become part of Hemenu. But the less Ra saw the problem, the more disquieted he felt. He wanted to find the root of it all, but like every time before, he found nothing. After looking for an indefinite period, Ra slightly tilted his head up. That feeling of something approaching grew clearer. At this moment, he suddenly had an idea. As the lord of the deities of the Hemenu world, he knew every inch of this world, but he seemed to know nothing about the things that did not belong to this world. Perhaps with a different perspective, he would discover what he had previously ignored. Shu, come to me. Commanding and deep, the voice arose, and in the next moment, Ra's voice reached the ears of Shu. Shu also immediately invoked his authority over wind and atmosphere, transforming into an invisible current racing toward the sun. Honorable God of Sun, what is your command? Standing upon the burning great sun, Shu's mind filled with various speculations. The God of Sun had not issued a divine decree for a long time. In recent years, he had been concentrating on the descendants of Isis, the sinners of Upper and Lower Egypt. Perhaps today was related to this as well. Had the sun in the sky finally decided to become the sun of the mortal realm and burn those mortals to ashes? The sun will leave the mortal realm, and I will travel to the heavens beyond and realms outside. Inform all deities not to panic, for this is nothing more than a normal change. Supreme God Ra, your will shall be carried out. Whether the sun is in the sky or not, you are the only light in the world. Alarmed in his heart, Shu did not expect to hear such a command, but after a moment of hesitation, he responded softly. Ra was not seeking his opinion. He was declaring his edict. Even as one of the 9 pillar gods, Shu had no intention of voicing any objection. Very well. He nodded, and with a wave, Ra dismissed the attendant. When he was left alone upon the great sun, Ra looked up into the sky, his body, golden like molten metal, roiled with supreme divine power. The world was enveloped in boundless darkness. He knew that well. Unlike Adam, the former god of sun who had been replaced and devoured, who was born directly from the primordial water, Ra had always harbored an instinctive aversion to this coat that protected the world. But now he had no choice but to try and pass through it. With that thought, Ra hesitated no longer. The great sun began to deviate from its course, the midday sun gradually shrinking. He ascended towards the sky, endlessly rising higher. In the Hemenu world, Ra, as the god of sun, was about to witness the void for the first time. He kept ascending, but in the distant chaos world, another sun did just the opposite. Within the vast starry sky, the sun and moon originally followed their set trajectories. But not long ago, Typhon's appearance not only scared away the moon that was about to set, but also brought the sun's journey to a halt. Fortunately, the day and night in Chaos World were not dictated by the sun and moon. They were actually a representation of eternal night's tidal ebb and flow. Thus, even if both supreme celestial bodies vanished from the sky, it did not affect the changing of day into night. Until recently, when the chaotic gods ventured beyond their foreign realm, as the world's very destiny and rules clashed with each other. Time thus became distorted, which was then reflected in the mortal realm. The passage of time on land didn't change much, but the flow of time over the oceans accelerated greatly, and even more so in the starry sky. The chaos of time manifested in various places amongst the stars, with some regions experiencing hundreds of thousands of years in an instant. All this stemmed from chaos's erroneous perception of time. As rules and destiny collided, such self-inflicted harm also led the world to attempt solving this issue. And the reason for such a contradiction was that the chaotic gods crossed over too early. The world recognized this problem but was powerless to change it. Instinctively blaming the slow progression of timelines, it then attempted to alter this status quo. Unfortunately for chaos, it might speed up its own flow of time, but it couldn't affect Hemenus, nor could this method hasten the swallowing of another world. So, the end result was this temporal oddity spread throughout the world. Time was thus distorted. The passing of days turned into ancient history. It seemed dreadful, but it actually wasn't a significant issue, because Typhon and the Divine King were still upon the earth, and Gaia's essence also still existed. The presence of these 3 great beings greatly influenced the occurrence of these changes, so where mortals lived, there wasn't too much of an obvious change. The same was true for the starry skies, with mostly immortals ascending to the heavens at this time, who naturally wouldn't face any issues due to the flow of time. All was meant to proceed in this manner, except there was one special exception, and that was the god of sun, Helios. Ever since Typhon came into the world, the original sun somehow turned a shade redder, and the collision of Chaos World's rules with fate was like the weakening of some protective barrier, causing the entire celestial body to start trembling ever so slightly. Still, the sun remained one of Chaos's most crucial celestial bodies, and Helios was an undying true god. Although he was currently experiencing an anomaly, in reality, he could endure until everything ended, if not for this sudden acceleration of time. So, within the core of the sun, Helios watched the branches in front of him release red mist and fell into a slight silence. He could persist for 100 days, but that did not mean he could last for 10,000 years. Chapter 534 Loyal and Devoted. The intense core of the great sun fluctuated, and Helios's complexion was unpredictable. This was a space of light and heat, the same place where he had been imprisoned as a child and where his father, the Titan god Hyperion's divine body, had collapsed and then restructured and healed. The power of the sun was most concentrated here, Anything that did not belong would be rejected. But at this moment, it did not bring Helios any feeling of closeness. Instead, strands of red mist penetrated from outside to inside. Indeed, from the outside to the inside, and not emanating from Helios himself. Although he had obtained this branch of unknown origin but terrifying power from Gaia's hands, Helios had not actually used it at first. No one would lightly draw on such an obscure and corrosive force. Moreover, what was even more critical was that Helios felt there was a limit to the amount he could bear. He was not Typhon, who had been implanted with the origin by the mother tree from the moment of birth, enabling him to bear the might to defeat the divine king. Nor was he Mother Earth, who, despite being severely depleted, still had a container for bearing power that was vast and boundless. Even if he accepted the power of the mother tree, Helios might become one of the few most powerful beings beneath the greatest, yet he still would not possess authority to rival Zeus. Therefore, under these circumstances, whether to embrace this external force seemed not so crucial. If he could not contend with, or at least make the divine king hesitate to act rashly, then acquiring this power would be more detrimental than beneficial. If something were to strip away his right to wield the sun, at least the divine king would be better than some unknown entity. But I was still greedy. Gaia's promise, when her offspring assault Mount of the Gods, the seat of divine king, the surrounding red mist grew thicker, to the point where Helios's visage became somewhat unclear. He still harbored ideas, since he could not bear to part with Gaia's promise and did not want to let an unknown force contaminate his divine body. The second-generation god of sun conceived of a very feasible alternative plan. As the master of the sun, whether it be his father or he himself, the truly most potent state was always directly manipulating the sun itself. Thus, faced with a dilemma, Helios made a decision he would greatly regret. He directly inserted the crystal-clear, dazzling branch, resembling a red crystal, into the surface of the sun, on the side that faced away from the earth and toward the starry sky. Compared to him, the sun could bear infinitely more power, and to the law of the world, the importance of the great sun undoubtedly surpassed his own by a great margin. If there was anything amiss with this possibly poisonous gift, the current order would not turn a blind eye. Helios's idea was sound, and in fact, his success was proven. Although, as the mother tree's branch took root and sprouted, a pale red halo gradually enveloped the celestial body's surface. This core of the great sun remained unaffected. The power of the sun grew stronger day by day, yet its essence remained pure, until today. The protection once composed of present-world forces suddenly trembled for unknown reasons, with holes of various sizes appearing. The power of the mother tree directly invaded this space through them, then formed the branch in front of Helios. If there had always been only one god of sun in the chaos world, then Helios might still have possessed the strength to fight. After all, this was merely a fraction of the power released by the outer god through the seal. But there were no ifs in reality. Even to this day, he could not match his father's attunement with the sun. Sasa. The branch swayed as if blown by the wind, stretching its limbs in the sun's core which flowed like liquid. With the rustling of the leaves, a vague notion also entered Helios's heart. His complexion wasn't very good. Although the expression was not very clear, Helios still easily understood what the outer god wished to convey. Intimidation and temptation, there was nothing surprising about this. But the key issue was that the knife of intimidation was handed over by himself. The contamination of the sun by the power of the outer god might not be a big deal to the chaos world, although some characteristics of the mother tree that transcended greatness did capture some attention from the world. But since it was far from truly crossing that half-step, so as assimilation proceeded, the world's own attention was actually waning. Yet it was a different story for the side of order. Previously, the actions of Helios did not cause too severe consequences, perhaps were not problematic. But now that the core of the sun was invaded, although this was actually caused by the disturbance of present-world forces, in the end, the blame still fell upon him who had let the wolf into the house. Almost without thinking, once this disaster ended, Helios would undoubtedly be punished by the present world. Perhaps Zeus would have an empathy with heaven moment, then gleefully strip him of his control over the sun, assuming that the contamination of the sun wasn't too severe. Otherwise, once the sun was completely under the control of the outer god, then there would be no value to his existence as the god of sun, and it wouldn't be surprising for him to be tossed into the abyss. But what benefit is there for me if I stand with you? His cheek twitched, and Helios asked as calmly as possible. In the next moment, amid the swaying of leaves, a passage from an ancient story unfolded before him. Chapter 535 Loyal and Devoted, _2. Perhaps it was the erosion of the sun that gave the mother tree an opportunity to glimpse into a few past events, those that had occurred when Hyperion had been imprisoned here. Helios immediately understood the meaning behind it. If the sun was once corrupted, then the suppression of the current world would probably follow, even far more serious than that caused by Typhon. After all, the sun is a part of the cosmos and should not be equated with the newly born demonic monsters. Just as the ancient sun god who had been imprisoned for half an era finally had a chance to break free, Helios too would have his turn. But if he refused the mother tree and was later held to account by the divine king, then he would truly be without hope. The sun. After a long silence, for some reason, Helios thought of his two sisters in this moment. Moon goddess Selene and goddess of dawn Eos. Compared to him, the power of both was pitifully weak. They hadn't even stepped into the realm of intermediate divine power. But it was precisely because of this, they had never faced the dilemmas Helios had to deal with. This world is just like that. The strong grasp their destiny, the weak drift along, yet nobody pays them much attention. Only those who are strong, but not strong enough, face real danger and easily become the target of all sides. But I have no choice. Reaching out, Helios grasped the branches of the mother tree, and in an instant, it seemed as if he saw a world where everything thrived with vitality. All spirits lived and worked in peace and joy, with only one giant tree supporting the heavens. So beautiful! With a low sigh, when Helios accepted the power of the mother tree using himself as a medium, the barriers that the present world had imposed on the sun were rendered utterly useless. A vast ocean-like power poured in, beginning to violently corrode the sun's abode. From the moment I was born, no one has ever given me a choice. My father, Cronus, Zeus, and the world itself. Since that's the case, the choice I make today is reasonable, isn't it? The voice echoed in the space, then fell silent. In this stretch of the cosmos where time was accelerated beyond measure, slow yet intense changes began to unfold inexorably. The mortal realm. Within a cave beneath the Carishan Mountains. The calamity of Typhon had just begun, and the stench of blood was already descending upon the world everywhere. Unlike the original trajectory of Typhon, the one that had accepted the power of the mother tree no longer needed a sea monster named Echidna to bear offspring, as its own flesh and limbs could transform into demonic monsters. In the place where it fought Zeus before, countless demonic monsters rose and slaughtered their way in all directions. However, it's worth noting that now Typhon's power, being composed of two parts, one of which bore distinct characteristics unlike those of the Chaos world. Thus the life born from its flesh was also different. Some of them did indeed match the traditional understanding of demonic monsters in the Chaos world, but more of them should perhaps be called aberrations. Like the sun-eaters in the spirit realm, these aberrations of the material side varied in strength but all uniformly displayed a strong immortality, erosiveness, and chaotic thinking. Unlike traditional monsters of chaos that could communicate and interact, they destroyed everything in sight with madness. They hated life, even the world itself, and places tainted by their power were left with scars of corruption that were difficult to erase, forever forbidden to all spirits. Even the surface of the spirit realm was slightly affected, though this minor contamination was quickly extinguished. Of course, whether it's the transformations on the land, the anomalies in the starry sky, or the missing gods, they are all clearly irrelevant to Zeus in the Carishan Mountains. At this moment, the illustrious divine king lay bare on the ground, his skeletal frame pierced through by black mist. His limbs were torn and scattered around, a scene of utter misery. TSK, I always seem to run into situations that others don't. It was the same with Odin and with Typhon. Why didn't my father and grandfather have this much trouble? Piercing pain radiated from all over his body, yet Zeus seemed completely unconcerned. He even managed to smile as if he weren't a prisoner but still the exalted divine king. Zephyrus, you've come. I'm glad to see you're willing to visit me, but my friend, I'm afraid I can't stand to talk to you right now. His voice was calm, and at that moment, amidst the vast cavern, Zeus suddenly tilted his head toward the direction of the cave entrance. There, an unusual current of air made no attempt to hide as it flew into the cave. With only slight recognition, Zeus identified the newcomer's identity. The god of west wind. He actually dared to come see him. Zeus had thought the gods would have either groveled at Typhon's feet by now or fled in all directions. It seemed the other hadn't let him down, still as loyal as ever, even to this day. It seems the previous generation of Divine King just didn't have the personal touch. Otherwise, why would such a loyal subject defect to my side? Pondering in secret, Zeus couldn't help but feel a bitter enjoyment in the thought. Your Majesty, you still possess such discerning eyes. The airflow trembled slightly before transforming into human form. Zephyrus looked somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected the Divine King to see through his movements, even in such a gravely wounded state. But this reassured him, adding a bit more confidence to his heart about rescuing Zeus at this time, even though the wind god felt somewhat uncertain. Maybe Typhon just isn't cut out to be the Divine King, he thought, his expression unchanged. Enough, Zephyrus. Let's dispense with the flattery for now. Zeus shook his head slightly, but the movement pulled at the wound in his chest. He grimaced and decided not to play any sycophancy games with the wind god any longer. He wasn't blind. Discerning eyes indeed. Thinking this, the Divine King turned his attention to the wind god standing before him. Now that you're here, my friend, I might need you to do me a small favor. Help me reattach my severed limbs to regain some mobility. Then find a mortal with an unyielding will to pull out this section of bone for me. A mortal? The god of west wind was puzzled, and Zeus continued to explain. Yes, a mortal. Typhon may be arrogant and insane, but it has a bit of brain. The power it left behind is still suppressing my divine power, preventing me from saving myself, or rather, it is suppressing all external divine powers. Unless you possess the power of a primordial deity, you, with your divine power, cannot pull out this bone. But perhaps because it was newly born, Typhon did not consider mortals a threat. Ha! Such is the folly of monsters. They always slip up somewhere. Gods falling to the hands of mortals, a hallmark of the Chaos world, so it's not shocking that the means Typhon left behind have such a flaw. And sensing the black mist encircling the bone, Zeus warned again. Remember, find a mortal with an unyielding will, otherwise they too may be tempted by Typhon's power. Not that this demon intended to tempt anyone. Get this done quickly. Once I'm free, Typhon's days are numbered. Although Zeus hadn't figured out how to deal with the king of all monsters, he spoke with great confidence. To win or not didn't matter. As a divine king, at least he had to make others believe he could win. Chapter 536. Having a daughter. Unlike the eastern lands now akin to hell on earth, in the regions close to the northeastern part of the continent, there was still peace at this moment. The northern part of the continent had always been desolate, with no deity willing to reside there. Hence, Typhon, having left Mount Olympus, had not approached this area. Due to environmental limitations, the further north one went, the fewer life forms there were, and thus there were no signs of attraction of the demonic monsters and evil creatures born from the flesh of Typhon. Right now, on a small hillock, a handsome young man was walking along the muddy path, leaning on an iron sword. He was Cadmos, the prince of Phoenicia, the brother of Princess Europa, and one of the kingdom's mightiest warriors. Ever since Europa was taken by Zeus, their father, Agenor, had commanded the three brothers to go to the west in search of her whereabouts. After consultation, each chose a different direction. Phoenix chose to head straight west, Kilkis went a bit to the southwest, while Cadmos ultimately chose to search in the northern regions. After many hardships and crossing the vast ocean, the young prince finally set foot on the legendary land. At this moment, He was unaware of the catastrophe that had befallen the mortal realm. In Cadmos's eyes, he only saw that the distant south seemed to have experienced a terrible natural disaster not long ago, which was vaguely visible even across great distances. From that day forward, the climate turned abnormal, the moon was unseen at night, and the sun's light felt somewhat uncomfortable. It was as if the orb of light was not an orb at all, but a glowing human face. Cadmos's childhood was devoid of storybooks, so naturally he wouldn't have seen any abstract cartoons about father-son, but this sensation felt similar. However, if the stuff of children's tales actually appeared in reality, that would truly be eerie and frightening. Of course, none of this deterred the young prince, who was kind and steadfast. His heart in the search for his sister remained unshaken. For him, this was not merely a task his father had imposed upon him. It was a mission he must complete. An elder brother should protect his sister, so no matter how many difficulties and dangers he faced, he would never retreat. The gods will protect me. In silent prayer, for a Phoenician prince of noble character, piety was a trait Cadmos naturally possessed. He believed the deities would bless him from the unknown, and that he would ultimately achieve his goal. Suddenly, a sound of surprise came from the sky, and Cadmos immediately raised his sword in guard. The next moment, he saw a deity descending to the ground on invisible currents of air from the southern sky. He recognized the identity of the newcomer, for in the kingdom of Phoenicia there were statues of the divine king and his envoys. Thus, watching the arrival of Zephyrus, Cadmos lowered his sword, straightened his clothing, and slightly bowed to the wind god. Respected wind god, envoy of the divine king, Cadmos from Phoenicia offers his respects to you, he said. Phoenicia. Having landed, Zephyrus pondered the somewhat familiar name. He couldn't recall from where he had heard of this human nation. It probably wasn't a land that worshipped any particular deity. As for the human nations overseas, or many newly established small cities, the god of West Wind generally knew little. But none of that mattered, nor did he care where this human came from. What was important was whether he met the requirements of the divine king. After leaving the cave, Zephyrus immediately started searching for the mortal Zeus required, but he did not head to the most densely populated areas. The core of the eastern lands might be populous, but it was also where divine traces were most abundant and where trouble was most likely to be encountered. So after much thought, the god of West Wind chose to head north. He was prepared to spend a great deal of time on this quest. After all, he did not know if any human tribes had moved north and settled there. But to his surprise, on the way, in the wilderness, he encountered a being who was clearly extraordinary among mortals. Such a man was sure to have a firm will. To avoid any unexpected developments, Zephyrus still wanted to confirm. Very well, Cadmos of Phoenicia. Fate has guided you and me to meet here, but I still want to know, why have you come here? I have come in search of my sister, Cadmos replied respectfully, bowing slightly. My sister Europa has disappeared, and I have been commanded by my father to cross mountains and seas, vowing to find her and bring her back. But to this day I have no news of her whereabouts. Exclamation point. Surprised, Zephyrus finally remembered where he had heard the name Phoenicia. Europa, was that not the new affection of the divine king? He instinctively thought to leave, but the next moment he halted. After all, it seemed from the human's words that this man did not know that Zeus was the source of it all. Then, after a moment of silence, Zephyrus looked at the respectful human prince before him. Are you willing to set aside your current quest and take up the heavy responsibility of saving the divine king? What? Cadmos looked up in surprise, and the god of West Wind explained lightly. Cadmos, you may have been away from your kingdom for a long time, so you are unaware, but the land now lies submerged in a sea of blood. A demonic monster named Typhon has risen from beneath the earth, vowing to destroy all life in the mortal realm. The gods dare not confront its sharpness, only the divine king stands in its way. Chapter 537. The Birth of a Daughter _2. Did the divine king win? Although Cadmos knew that if victory had been assured, there wouldn't have been a need for his rescue. He still couldn't bring himself to believe that the almighty divine king he had been educated about since childhood could ever be defeated. No, Cadmos, the divine king failed. Zephyrus shook his head, his expression unchanged. But it was not because the divine king was weaker than it, but because the demon king shamelessly launched a sneak attack, overcoming the great Zeus when he was unarmed. But this is only temporary. Gods do not die, and Typhon can't ultimately harm the divine king. It cannot alter the god's eternal and noble essence, and its defeat is inevitable. But to hasten the day when this comes to pass, and for the peace of the mortal realm to be restored, I need a mortal to save the divine king. Typhon's power will repel true gods, but it will not repel mortals. In the eyes of the king of all monsters, there are no weaklings, and that is your opportunity. So Cadmos, are you willing to take up this responsibility and aid the king of Olympus? I am willing. His expression determined. Searching for his sister was not a matter of a day or two. But the virtuous prince could not bear to see disaster play out in the world, so he agreed without hesitation. Zephyrus was quite satisfied with this, believing that the divine king would be pleased with his efficiency as well. He then grasped Cadmos's arm and together they soared into the sky. The innate deities were quite lax in controlling their own power. Not every deity was able to ensure that they didn't harm a bystander mortal while unleashing their force, but Cadmos was a powerful warrior in his own right. So very soon, under the guidance of the god of West Wind, the prince arrived outside the cave where the divine king was. Inside the Carytian cave, there was no difference from when the god of West Wind had left. The divine king's limbs had already been reattached to his body. The blood stains on his face were washed away, his clothes restored to wholeness, with only that bone that originally belonged to him still firmly lodged in Zeus's chest. Without a spine, without divine power, the divine king was immobile, lying obediently on the ground. The long-lost solitude surged into his heart, yet it was a different kind of sensation. The god of West Wind was sent to find a mortal, but Zeus was not free to relax, for another problem awaited him. He had bragged before the other party, claiming to have a way to deal with Typhon, but he knew very well he was no match for the king of all monsters. Even if he immediately gathered all 12 principal gods, possessing the complete power of greatness, he was not certain he could triumph over his opponent. For during this period of contemplation, he had gradually noticed certain unsettling factors. Typhon's power felt familiar to him, much like the power that had caused him to fall into a healing slumber. Only its power was not as terrifying, as if it were muted by a layer. The divine king had determined that this special power definitely did not come from the Lord of Darkness, but was likely from an adversary even the primordial gods feared. In such a case, even if he could command greater strength, what if his opponent exploded with power in the heat of battle? Moreover, the investiture of principal gods was not without consideration. At this juncture, Zeus did not feel he had the opportunity to hold the ceremony. Therefore, he could either watch as the adversary wreaked havoc until the present world expelled it, achieving victory without fighting, then face the questioning of the gods, the nearly annihilated mortals, and thus see his divine authority shaken, or he had to find another way, one that would ensure Typhon could never recover, a way to guarantee his own victory. But the question remained, in the chaos world, was there really a power so formidable that even the greatest could not escape, a power that once ensnared meant certain failure? Of course there is, and that is fate. Gaia couldn't escape it, the Heavenly Father couldn't escape it, Cronus couldn't escape it. I, too, have always been avoiding it. Gazing up at the stone wall above, Zeus easily identified the most powerful force in the world, apart from the world itself. Or rather, fate might be a hand of the world, with the world using her to manipulate everything in it. However, knowing is one thing, it doesn't mean Zeus had a way to wield this power. Although he always claimed, "Fate is on my side," no one really knew how fate operated. His belief that fate would protect him stemmed from the fact that he was still the divine king, and currently no offspring had shown any sign of possibly replacing him, so he couldn't possibly fail. Yet a divine king without fame, without faith, was still a divine king. He dared not guarantee that fate would continue to protect his renown and power. I need a god who can influence fate, I should have such a deity. Damn it. The position of the divine king has revealed to me. I am supposed to father 3 daughters who have control over parts of destiny. They must be descendants of the divine king. This is a constant that cannot be changed. But with whom shall I father them? Grinding his teeth in frustration, Zeus had known about his 3 daughters since the first day he became divine king. As 2 eras passed, the world gradually moved toward completion, and the shaping of the destiny of all things began to shift from the macroscopic to the microscopic. Hence, on a predetermined path, indeed, 3 fates were destined to be born into the world. They are daughters of the divine king, but in reality have no father-daughter relationship with the divine king because they are birthed by the position of divine king, recognized in the present world, indifferent to who actually sits upon it. Therefore, Zeus, who ascended to the throne, received enlightenment and did not reject the idea of this mission. However, many years had passed and he had not yet fulfilled this task. At first, Zeus thought Themis would be the mother of the 3 fates, but she had already left Olympus. Later on, he thought it may have to do with the primordial gods who govern eternal night, so he set his sights on the god of doom, born from the power of eternal night and under the service of Hades. But before he could act, the calamity of Typhon erupted. Zeus was in a difficult position now. He needed a deity in charge of destiny to assist him, but it was definitely too late for a new birth. Apart from Hera, no other deity could to some extent manipulate the speed and timing of the birth of true gods. After all, they didn't hold the authority over procreation. A thought suddenly struck his heart, and Zeus's expression subtly changed. In that moment, he suddenly thought of another god, one who met all these demanding conditions. He could father the daughters of the divine king in strict adherence to the requirements of the law. He held some of the divine authority over procreation, allowing him to control the timing of offspring, and he would certainly help himself, but most importantly, he did not need to seek him out. Yes, such a deity did exist, and he was both far on the horizon and close at hand. The god with all these attributes was Zeus himself. King Zeus, or rather, every god, they all had the ability to become women, and in the original myths, the divine king indeed had done so. What's particularly special is that unlike other deities, even if they changed their divine body's gender, it was almost impossible for them to alter their essence. A male god transformed into a female god couldn't conceive, but Zeus, who shared half of the procreative authority with Hera, could. So fitting, so ingenious. Thus, at that moment, Zeus was plunged into deep conflict. Although, in the original trajectory, His Majesty the Divine King later had a beloved beautiful youth, this still was somewhat different from birthing daughters. Even Zeus, progressive in thought in this respect, couldn't help but feel a certain hesitation. Chapter 538 Moirai. Your Majesty, true to my trust, under the guidance of fate, I have found the mortal who can help you escape your predicament. Zeus was still entangled in his dilemma, when suddenly, the voice of Zephyrus came from outside. Whatever choice it would take, breaking free from the current predicament and regaining freedom was always the first choice. So the divine king put this matter aside for the moment, turning his gaze toward the entrance of the cave. Not long after, accompanied by a gust of wind, the figure of the god of west wind materialized in front of the divine king. He entered alone, having left Cadmos outside the cave. Your Majesty, I have brought the person. With a slight bow, Zephyrus glanced at the bones in Zeus's chest. It seemed that, with the approach of the deity, the black fog swirling above became more animated. He was certain, if he dared to reach out and grab it, his end would certainly not be pleasant. He is the mortal Cadmos, Prince of Phoenicia. In search of his sister, he traveled westward, crossing vast seas and mountains without faltering. I believe among humans, he would indeed merit the description resolute of will. Prince of Phoenicia? His eyes flickered slightly. Zeus's expression became a bit unnatural, but it was a fleeting moment. However, at this moment he thought of his previous idea. Zephyrus might have said so offhand, but now, Zeus truly felt the guidance of fate. It was during his encounter with the Phoenician princess that the disaster of Typhon erupted, and then only the fates who controlled destiny could help him win, and at this time, Europa's brother came in search of her, about to become the hero who would save the divine king. The more ignorant, the more fearless. On the contrary, the more he understood the terror of fate, the more Zeus dreaded it. Had it involved the ascendancy to the throne of the divine king, he might have had to use some means to delay the arrival of fate, but if it were anything else, Zeus would not intend to oppose it. Moreover, this was his own idea in the first place. At that moment, the scales in his heart tipped ever so slightly, but the divine king remained impassive. He simply nodded, as if the identity of the visitor posed no issue at all. Then invite him in, this noble among mortals. If he truly can be of assistance to me, then I shall also bestow upon him a glory no other mortal has ever had on earth. Seeing no objection from the divine king, the god of west wind also breathed a sigh of relief. With time pressing, he didn't know how much of what that mortal had said was true. Let him try, and if he happens to be bewitched by the power of Typhon, then he will be killed on the spot, and the search for another will begin anew. In Chaos World, time was swiftly passing, and beyond the void, under the boundless darkness, golden points of light shone ever more brightly. However, at a certain moment, Nyx suddenly looked back towards the way they came. She could feel that something that should have happened long ago was returning to its proper course there. Just as she had sensed before her departure, the fixed number of destiny began to divide. Just like the oath eventually bestowed upon the Styx River, the divine authority to peer into and weave destiny was also about to welcome its rightful owner. What is it? Noticing Nyx's subtle movement, Lane asked softly. Nothing significant, just that another deity is about to be born. And furthermore, a deity that controls destiny. Shaking her head slightly, Nyx looked no more. This scene was something she had anticipated, and she harbored no thoughts of her dominion being encroached upon. The Fates would be the children of the divine king, but that did not mean they were subservient to him. They were merely another proxy of the present world. Zeus once told the gods, "The Fates to me are as cruel as I to you." Although Nyx did not know this phrase, she was able to make the same judgment. Perhaps as the vessel for the birth of the Fates, that divine king would have the chance to make a demand at the beginning, but only once. In fact, what concerned Nyx more than their birth was another matter. Who has the power to bear the Fates with the divine king? She searched through the entire Olympus pantheon and found no deity that met the criteria. They've come. As they conversed, the changes at the edge of the distant world continued unabated, and with the burst of a sound that seemed to exist and not exist, a golden celestial body leaped forth. It was the sun, radiating endless light and heat, illuminating the void of darkness. And unlike the sun of the chaos world, the surface of this body of light pulsed with flames, symbolizing both destruction and rebirth. This was the difference brought about by the divergence of worlds. In comparison to Chaos World, Heminu World had no fire god, or rather, the authority of fire was naturally affiliated with this sun. As the supreme power of the world, the sun gathered most authorities that could be connected with its essence, ultimately manifesting Ariadne. Standing atop the vast celestial body, Ra beheld the world beyond for the first time. The cold and desolate void, which had been empty, was now dotted with a few points of light, each enfolding a deity with a distinct aura. Yet all these were but side notes. What truly captured his attention were those two overwhelmingly palpable figures. This was the void outside the Heminu world, where the powers of two different worlds collided. And the only two outsiders not swept up by the forces of Chaos World were naturally using their own power to resist the laws of the foreign realm. No communication was necessary, nor was discernment needed. At the moment when three deities locked eyes in the void, they all understood each other's true names. At the same time, Ariadne realized what he needed to do in that instant. Those mortals tainted by the power of the foreign realm might only be an accident, but his true enemies were these invaders from afar. He felt the world's vulnerability and struggle, as well as the fear and hatred from deep within. He could use rebirth to ward off decay, but if the world ceased to exist, what could he use against his own fated end? Outsiders. The deep voice resonated through the nothingness. Even though it was in a different language, No one misunderstood his meaning. Endless radiance blossomed in the void, and the power of the Hemenu world's outermost barrier, the absolute void, infused Ra. At that moment, the might of Egypt's supreme deity was once again elevated. Outsiders must die. With the strike of the golden staff, endowed with unparalleled might, unexpectedly, Ra's target wasn't Lane or Nyx. Even with just one encounter, this divine king from the Chaos world recognized that the two were not easy to deal with. Compared to them, it was better to target the other deities. The one ultimately chosen as his target was the goddess of wisdom, Athena, who had just been deprived of palace destiny, considered by fate to have completed her mission, which greatly diminished the protective forces around her. SSSSK. Creak, creak. Within a cave in the Mount Carishan range, the grating noise slowly built up. The tall and handsome prince of Phoenicia was now grasping the divine king's ribcage, slowly pulling it out bit by bit. Dark mist swirled around the white bones, but it seemed to view Cadmos as a harmless object, no different from rocks or animals, and thus did not react to him. Nonetheless, this did not make the prince's task any easier. The power of the mother tree was highly erosive and seductive. Although this didn't manifest much in Typhon, it wasn't completely absent either. From the moment he gripped the bone, various false and true voices began to whisper incessantly in Cadmos's ear. They were tempting him, telling the prince of the benefits of accepting them. However, clearly, for the future city founder of Thebes, and the true god for a grandfather, these non-compulsory forces could not shake his resolve. So, under Zeus's pained gaze, the vertebra was ultimately extracted, and the binding power over the divine king ceased to be effective. Clang! With the task completed, the prince, suddenly relaxed, felt a wave of dizziness. Although Typhon's power had not succeeded in corrupting him, it had placed a tremendous mental burden on Cadmos. Now that the task was completed, a strong sense of fatigue overwhelmed him. He immediately collapsed to the ground, falling unconscious, with only the sound of his treasured sword clanging against the ground. Huff! This feeling of weakness. I never want to experience it a second time. The bone, once extracted, fell onto the divine king's body, then writhed and coiled back into its rightful place. Typhon's power was still there, but it could no longer confine Zeus's mighty force, which was above all other deities. Visibly, his body rejuvenated, blood returning to his pale face. Zeus rose from the ground, and despite still being greatly injured, from the outside, it looked as if he had regained his former strength. At this moment, inside the cave of Mount Carishan, there was no one else except for Zeus and the unconscious prince of Phoenicia. To prevent Zephyrus's presence from being a stimulus during the extraction of the bone, he had moved a good distance away earlier. Now, gradually recovering, inside this cave where only one person was conscious, Zeus could at last take a moment to reflect on his earlier thoughts. Having regained his power, the divine king once again affirmed that he could not defeat Typhon head-on. He needed additional help, and fate was his only choice. This isn't a daughter I sired, but like Athena, she sprang from my head. In silent contemplation, or rather more contemplating how to manage the aftermath. For a divine king who shared a part of the power of procreation, simply ensuring the birth of the fates wasn't a difficult matter. Right, exactly. Now the question is, according to the revelation once given by the position of divine king, the fates need to be sired by two individuals. While I can find a loophole, she indeed needs a father in terms of destiny. Zeus's face was rigid as he considered many options, but he ultimately dismissed each one. He couldn't allow a deity to take this role, because even though the parents of the fates were merely tools for their birth, they would indeed receive a small favor from fate for this action, like offering them a reasonable condition or something. Zeus did not want eternal deities to receive this benefit, so he could only choose a finite mortal. Mortals would die, and mortal fates were easier to manipulate. He could compensate them in another way for their fate, and when they died, it would all be over. With this in mind, the Divine King once again began to sift through mortals, only to sadly realize that the outside world was now infested with Typhon's spawn. If he did not want to reveal his secret actions, it would be best not to be too picky. So to say, is this also the guidance of fate? Recalling the words of the god of west wind at the beginning, Zeus's eyes darkened, but he ultimately said nothing. He simply gestured, extracting some bone, flesh, and sinew from the unconscious prince's body. These materials were eventually shaped into a humanoid form in his hands, but the most crucial component was still missing. Then Zeus, expressionless, gave himself a cut, successfully making this creation complete. After all, to ensure that the one giving birth was indeed a true god, he needed to maintain as much as possible the nobility of the bloodlines on both sides of the Fate's parents, and it would be hard to find bloodlines more noble than the divine kings in this world, especially now that there were two of them. This is all for world peace. Muttering to himself, as if convincing himself, Zeus started to employ the art of transformation upon himself. Soon enough, just like the once handsome divine king, what remained in place was a golden-haired, attractive goddess with a seductive figure. Chapter 539 Fruit of One Day. Under the scorching midday sun, the Carishian mountain range was as tranquil as ever. Perhaps it was because the most terrifying monsters had once visited this place, leaving behind an aura that ordinary people could hardly detect. In any case, not only did common beings avoid the nearby area as if their lives depended on it, but even the demonic monsters were reluctant to approach the mountain range. Standing halfway up the slope, Zephyrus silently awaited the divine king's emergence from the cave. The bone-grinding, soul-penetrating noise that was there before had vanished, and quietude followed suit. In the mind of the god of the west wind, Zeus must have freed himself from the shackles of Typhon's power. However, as he waited left and right, Zephyrus had yet to see Zeus emerge from the cavern. It was as if the previous commotion had been an illusion, which for a moment puzzled the west wind god. But he wasn't very willing to go in and check. If the divine king had not met with any accidents, then his continued presence inside might mean he had matters to attend to, and disturbing him at this time wouldn't be wise. And if the divine king had encountered an accident, that would likely mean Typhon had left behind some other trap. Although, no matter how one looked at it, the arrogant monster didn't seem like the type to set up contingencies. Anything was possible. In such a scenario, Zephyrus certainly didn't want to invite trouble. Therefore, the west wind god stood still, choosing to wait outside instead. Time slowly ticked away. During the wait, with the omnipresent sound of the wind, Zephyrus thought he heard some odd noises, but they seemed to be blocked by some force, creating a faint, almost unperceivable sensation. However, the wind god didn't invest extra energy into this, quickly dismissing those thoughts. After all, while the place currently seemed safe, nobody could guarantee that Typhon wouldn't take a wild fancy to return here. With tension in the air, it was natural for some anomalies to be momentarily put to the back of his mind. Time continued to march on. God knows how much time had passed, but at a certain moment, just as Zephyrus was starting to consider calling out to check, he suddenly sensed some changes occurring from the cave behind him. In that instant, the west wind god shivered for reasons unknown. For a brief second, he felt as though he had journeyed back many years, to the time when he was but a subordinate of the second-generation divine King Cronus. He had been ordered to the underworld to monitor the activities of Mother Night and the Lord of the Spirit Realm, and he had successfully completed his mission. A fortunate omen indeed. It seems that His Majesty the Divine King is preparing some powerful weapon against Typhon. Coming back to his senses, Zephyrus considered this familiar premonition as some kind of primordial deity-level terrifying threat. But last time, it was he who had to confront such a threat, whereas this time, this fearsome thing seemed to have emerged at the hands of Zeus. Without doubt, this must surely be a means prepared for Typhon. It appears just as the Divine King had mentioned before, he truly did have a way to deal with that monster. I thought he was just talking casually. Well, yes. Divine Kings indeed have their ways. Who could have foreseen Cronus being so formidable before the turn of an era? But this is none of my concern. Once this disaster is over, I'll probably become the new principal god of Olympus. Musing to himself, though Zephyrus's divine power was still lacking a bit, he believed this was not an issue. The divine king would find a way. Thinking of this, the wind god couldn't help but once again marvel at his own luck. Over the years, he always seemed to run into this or that trouble and was always assigned dangerous tasks, but somehow each time the outcome was exceptionally good. He attributed this to good fortune, for in the mythic world, luck is indeed a tangible entity. Now was yet another ordeal, and the god of the west wind believed that the result this time would be no exception. Inside the cave of the Carishan mountain range, Zeus had already reverted to his original form without anyone knowing when. The golden-haired deity stood in a corner of the cave, beside a rock pillar. The stratum seemed to have been shaven off 3 layers by something, appearing smooth and polished. The divine king's face was expressionless, his right hand subconsciously pressed against his abdomen. Although everything was over, wave after wave of non-existent phantom pain continued to surge into Zeus's heart. The divine king admitted that, like many deities of Olympus, he indeed had a preference for many beautiful things, and could even appreciate the delicacy of male beauty, but by all means, as a standard chaos male god, Zeus had always been inclined to be the active partner. Neither he nor the likes of Apollo in later generations ever took an interest in passivity, but today's event undeniably challenged his perceptions. For the sake of world peace, for the stability of the present, and for the fates to be born without hindrance, he made such a sacrifice, performing such a deed while holding the dignity of a divine king. Thinking this, the divine king silently vowed in his heart that he would not allow a second sentient being to know what had happened today. Fortunately, indeed no one was able to notice here. After all, that human prince had been soundly asleep under the power of Zeus, and the god of the west wind had not entered either. Let all of this be buried in history. After today, the people will only remember that in a critical moment, the favored divine king of the present drew power from fate and from the very blood and bone extracted by Typhon to bring forth 3 goddesses. Chapter 540 Fruit of 1 Day _2. Just as with the 3 Furies and the goddess of beauty born from Uranus's blood, it was not impossible for a deity to be born from the blood of the divine king. Crack, crack, His gaze suddenly sharpened, and Zeus looked forward involuntarily. In the center of the cave, where he had previously been, 3 cocoons of light were floating in midair. But now, they were slowly fracturing, with thin pieces of the light shell continuously falling. Perhaps due to the peculiarities of fate, the birth process of the fates also seemed to be quite unique. Not long ago, Zeus had watched them arrive in this world and expand from the size of an infant to the height of a man. They seemed to not need time to grow like other deities, or rather, for the fates, the existence of fate itself was their nourishment for growth. Crack, 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 like a row of dominoes being toppled. As the first crackling sound was heard, a succession of crisp noises followed. Under Zeus's gaze, at a certain moment, as if breaking through a critical point, fragments of the light cocoon flaked off like snowfall. As the pieces floated down and then disappeared, the 3 distinct goddesses came into view when the cocoon of light slowly dissipated before Zeus. One was a maiden, one middle-aged, one elderly. The oldest not only looked unlike the daughter of the divine king but more like the grandmother of Gaia. And by each of their sides lay a naturally formed divine artifact. The maidenly one was Clotho, whose artifact was a spindle. She could use it to spin the threads of fate, each strand representing a lifespan. The middle-aged woman was Lachesis, whose artifact was a measuring rod, which she used to measure the length of life, determining the length of the thread. And the wrinkled old woman was Atropis, in possession of a pair of scissors. She could cut the threads of fate short, leading lives to their end. The 3 fates, at such a moment in time, had finally come into the world. Like the once mighty Titans, they were born fully grown, possessing notable wisdom and judgment. And with just a glance, Zeus understood that they were probably not just any ignorant newborn gods. As they were born from fate, they were naturally well aware of its workings. So in this world, except for the things hidden and secluded by great powers, from the past to the present, there was little they did not know. Of course, this did not mean they were all-knowing in some sense, for they were only agents of fate. If they dared to reveal what they knew to those who were not meant to know, they too would suffer the backlash of fate. But there are exceptions. I am the king of all gods, the indispensable guide for your arrival in this world. You should obey my commands, shouldn't you? His expression serene, as if forgetting the earlier displeasure. Colossal power lurked within Zeus, ready but unreleased. However, opposite him, even the smallest Clotho showed no trace of fear towards the divine king. They regarded Zeus as one might look at a rock, a blade of grass, and not the mightily powered king of all gods or their legitimate divine parent. You brought us forth under the guidance of fate, but fate has already favored you enough. Therefore, to fate itself, it owes you nothing. With white hair cascading over her shoulders and from beneath her withered visage, a voice equally raspy spoke. This newly born elder seemed to be a genuine sage of advanced years, imparting her wisdom to the young. But we are indeed different, divine king. We came into the world because of you. Thus, our destinies are indebted to you, and we can assist you somewhat. But this is to be only once, and the backlash of fate that comes with it, we cannot shield you from either. Backlash. Frowning, Zeus did not find the response of the fates surprising. He had never deluded himself into thinking they would obey him without question. However, he was unprepared to face the backlash of fate, something he had never encountered before. Yes, the backlash. Sometimes it is indeed not a good thing, but sometimes it is not necessarily so. With a low chuckle, Atropos offered no further explanation. She simply reached out and gently drew a line, and then, in front of her in the void, she traced the patterns of threads. In an instant, Zeus seemed to glimpse much, yet none of it stayed in his mind. He remembered only one thread, and upon that thread, the aura was that of Typhon. There might be many things you desire, divine king, like how to become an eternal ruler, like how to make the primordial deities bow down to you, but these I cannot do. I am but the hand of fate, not fate itself. All I can do is offer you a choice. What choice? His expression somewhat grim, Zeus looked at this goddess emanating an aura of riddles. It was as though she saw through many things but wished to share none with him. This feeling made the divine king uncomfortable. Nevertheless, his greatest predicament was indeed Typhon. Fate was indeed mysterious, but once he completed his own rites, he would have plenty of time to delve into its mysteries. For now, he would let it be and listen to what the fates could offer him to aid in defeating Typhon. Chapter 541 Fruit of 1day_3. Destiny is equitable. To gain something, you must pay something. If you wish to defeat Typhon, you need to put a comparable stake on the table. If you wish to kill it, the same applies. Withered fingers touched that single thread of fate, and Atropos transformed it into a seed, then handed it over to Zeus. Give it what you can pay. It will then produce the necessary effect. Typhon will not be able to touch you, so you must give it the chance to do so. Put up your divine power, your destiny, your throne as the divine king. Endow it with the ability to take all that from you. If you are defeated by it, you will lose everything. You shall fall into an eternal slumber, and Typhon will usurp your destiny. If I can defeat it, Zeus said coldly, his voice detached, then what use do I have for this seed? If not, how is that different from giving Typhon a gift? The difference is that you've bet your throne, and it must also bet its own power, as long as you both do so willingly. It will gain the capacity to thoroughly vanquish you, but if it fails to do so within the allotted time, the situation will completely invert. The agreement witnessed by fate will draw out its power and add it to yours, shifting the balance of power between you two. By that time, you will have the strength to defeat it. With a chuckle, the wrinkles on her face crowded together, reminiscent of the wicked, which in future fairy tales. Atropos lifted her pallid eyes and finally issued a warning to the divine king. However, I must remind you, divine king, those wise enough to peer into destiny do not scrutinize their own, as it only places them under fate's dominion, to be manipulated at will. And the punishment from destiny is only postponed. it never disappears. What kind of fruit of one day to grow is for you to decide, as long as you can afford the price. And I will only be responsible for handing it over to Typhon. Of course, I understand. Nodding, Zeus reached out and took the seed. He studied the oddity resultant from the thread of fate between him and Typhon, but could discern nothing special about it. It seemed so ordinary, as if only something special could elicit a response from it. After a long examination, Zeus gave up on trying to study it. He prepared to infuse it with his price as Atropus had instructed, but as if he remembered something, Zeus suddenly stopped his actions. I remember, you said, the power to defeat it, not the power to kill it. And Typhon, it seems, is not immortal. It only possesses a very high degree of undying nature. So, could it be that I cannot kill it? The cave fell silent for a moment, as the divine king and the fates looked at each other. After a while, Atropus averted her gaze. Of course you can, divine king, but to break through such strong undying nature, you would have to stake your own death. Can gods die? No, hence in theory, death is not a stake you can make, because you can renounce your divine power, you can give up your throne, but even if you wish to, you cannot give up your life. But I feel, the divine king interjected lightly, that I can stake my death, and moreover, even if I do and lose, I will definitely not die, because the world cannot tolerate such an event. That being the case, I might as well do so. After all, this price only stands if I intend to kill Typhon. If I do not kill it, then it is a non-existent agreement. In the cave, seeing that Atropus no longer spoke, Zeus smiled and sowed the seed in the ground. Then, the next moment, that seed, which had drawn the divine king's price, took root and swiftly grew into a tree. A single fruit formed at its peak, and as the aged hand plucked it, the entire tree turned to dust. As you can see, divine king, I will present it before Typhon, but whether it eats the fruit is up to it. Taking the fruit into her sleeve, Atropus turned around. She glanced at Zeus, who was still staring at the spot where the tree had vanished, and then walked towards the cave entrance. Afterwards, we sisters will find a place to reside, so as not to trouble Olympus. But I advise you once more, your majesty, the divine king. The price that you think you can evade will have to be paid one day, and those who try to play with fate will in turn be played by fate. This is an unalterable truth, and not even the divine king is an exception. As the owl-like voice faded away, Atropus and her sisters left, and with the departure of the fates, the cave once again became quiet. Seemingly oblivious to the warning for a while, it wasn't until the three goddesses' figures had vanished that Zeus finally seemed to come to his senses, straightening his garments. He looked at the small pit where the tree of destiny had borne fruit, then his expression became indecipherable. He strode out of the cave, and the next instant, the cavern that had witnessed all of today's events was reduced to ruins by the whispering of the divine king. Heh! Destiny cannot be played with, that of course I know. But I am the divine king, Atropus, and has the divine king not always been played by fate? All 3 generations of divine kings it had been the same. If debt was destined, then for Zeus what harm was there in shouldering a bit more? Chapter 542, Mount Nysa and the Vessel of Aeons. Not long after, outside the Carytian cave, Zeus met with Zephyrus, the god of west wind, who had finally waited for him to emerge. Zeus didn't discuss anything superfluous with his loyal servant. The divine king simply shared the true history he had compiled, praised his servant's loyalty, and while arranging how to reward the mortal prince who had made great contributions, he also probed whether Zephyrus had heard anything he shouldn't have. The result seemed to have greatly satisfied Zeus. Zephyrus said he had always stood by the door and had noticed nothing amiss. Relieved, Zeus then signaled him to leave the place first. He hadn't yet recovered to his peak condition, and even if he were fully restored, Zeus didn't believe he could withstand an assault from Typhon. Even if Typhon consumed the fruit of one day, he feared he still wouldn't be a match. So what he needed to do now was to find a place to hide where no one could find him. As long as they couldn't find him, naturally Typhon couldn't talk about defeating him. Once time passed, everything would become fixed fate. And conveniently, he had a hideout unknown to everyone else. The only one privy to it was Zephyrus, so quite decisively, Zeus chose to take him along. While the divine king was still conversing with his servant, at the same time, the three fates who had left earlier were heading north. In the northern part of the continent was a mountain range known as Mount Nysa, a place close to the stars, and it was destined to become the future abode of the three goddesses collectively known as the Moirai. However, not long after leaving the Mount Carishan, the youngest of the fates stopped. Standing on an unnamed hill, Clotho grasped her eldest sister's withered arm. "You lied to him, sister. You didn't tell the divine king the whole truth. There's another way the fruit of one day takes effect. Destiny doesn't have to be achieved by plunder. It can also be about balance and stability, especially when the force obtained through plunder is itself abnormal," Clotho said assertively, watching the fruit in Atropos' hands. She and her second sister, Lachesis, had been silent during the eldest's conversation with Zeus, trusting Atropos' judgment. But that didn't mean they had no doubts, particularly about the seeds given to the divine king. They were very clear about what Atropos had concealed. Zeus needed to stake everything he owned to give Typhon a chance to defeat him, which was fine, but what he offered shouldn't be destiny and authority inherited by Typhon. According to Atropos, if Typhon failed to defeat the divine king within the set time, then his strength would flow to Zeus, another completely unnecessary consequence. The true fruit of one day should be straightforward. If Zeus failed, then he would lose his throne without it being taken by Typhon. If Typhon failed, then he would lose his strength but wouldn't transfer it to Zeus. Since Zeus had no authority to make Typhon the divine king, naturally, he had no right to bet the throne of the divine king as a bargaining chip. He was merely promising an empty check, just like the death he wagered. Even if he were truly defeated, he could not actually pay out such a bet. Just as the world would not sit idly by for the death of a deity, the present world would not accept a monster as the divine king. This led to a problem. As Atropos herself said, no one can manipulate destiny, and those who try to do so will, in turn, be manipulated by it. With her concealment, the divine king once again made a bet he could not afford. So what would the price be? This time, the price would not be paid by Zeus. Unlike death, the method to defeat Typhon was an obligation the three sisters owed to the divine king. They should have been completely transparent with Zeus about this matter. Since Atropos failed to do so, she alone would bear all the consequences that follow. "Sister, you lied to him. The backlash of fate has already started to take its toll on you. But why did you do it?" Although they had only left a short while ago, it was nearly visible to the naked eye that Atropos had aged further than when she was first born, even emitting a putrid stench. However, Clotho felt no revulsion, knowing what Atropos, the firstborn of the three fates, had shouldered for her two younger sisters. Lachesis carried a portion of the burden, which made her look slightly older, but that was merely a fraction of it, whereas Clotho was truly free of debt. The reason? Clotho and Lachesis. Do you think I'm harming him? After coughing, her teeth appeared yellow and somewhat blackened. At this moment, Atropos did not resemble a goddess. She looked more like a mortally ill peasant woman, someone one would instinctively want to keep away from. Isn't it so? Destiny tells us that the power within Typhon doesn't belong to this world, or even the chaos world in its origin. Though it has become part of it, this is still not good for the divine king, right? Helping her elder sister up, Lachesis also harbored some doubts. She looked to be in her 30s, the prime age for a woman's alluring maturity. Her fair complexion contrasted starkly against Atropos' wrinkled and lined skin, and her voluptuous form only accentuated Atropos' decay, making it all the more repellent. Chapter 543 Mount Nysa and the Vessel of Aeons_2. Yes, by all accounts, the divine king should not be meddling with powers that do not belong to the present world, given that his throne originates from it. But those are ordinary circumstances. Under normal conditions, one can afford to be choosy. But when near death, one needs to grasp every lifeline. A thin, cold smile appeared on Atropos' face. while her sisters Lachesis and Clotho became increasingly confused. Yet without waiting for her siblings to ask, Atropos simply raised her hand, observing her wrinkled skin. The Fates are not deities of time. They were not meant to be born with appearances of varying ages. The reason behind Atropos's aging was something all three sisters were well aware of. This is the backlash of destiny, Clotho. At the very moment of our birth, the backlash was embedded within us. I was born first, so I bore the brunt of it, the most terrifying part. Lachesis was born second, so she too shared some, albeit inconsequentially. And you were the last, thus you were spared. I am grateful to you, elder sister, but that's only because we were not born before. As long as we strive to untangle the threads of destiny, that will lead to nothing. I have already seen it. Clotho's words were cut off by Atropos's sharp voice, who hadn't realized that her hand was trembling subconsciously. She looked at her sister and said word by word, "The fate of this world was not meant to be this way. It's been disturbed, agitated, and the source lies with one or several amongst those primordial gods that we still cannot see clearly. Something has always been influencing it. If we cannot resolve the source that has caused all this, the fractures weighing on destiny will only accumulate and thicken. Until one day, with the collapse of a critical node, everything will be buried, and we will be at the forefront." "So, the critical node you saw, is that the Divine King?" "Yes." Taking a deep breath, Atropos tried to calm herself down. As the first of the Fates to be born, she had borne the burden of the backlash from destiny for the past 3 epochs and had also glimpsed a corner of the future. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The deity disturbing destiny ultimately left traces within it. While Atropos could not yet see clearly who he was, she had already noted his next target. The Divine King was shrouded in his shadow, in the river of fate. Zeus now stood on the precipice, even if he himself had not yet realized it. And to someone dying, even poison must be swallowed without hesitation. No, perhaps Zeus had realized it to some extent. Not much, but certainly not nothing. Atropos even suspected that for this deceit, Zeus had possibly sensed something but had chosen not to speak of it. After all, gaining a measure of Typhon's power much faster than accumulating it slowly was a far more appealing option. As for potential consequences, just as the Divine King had no concern for staking death, since the world does not let deities truly die, Zeus similarly had no concerns about this power being problematic, for unlike the force that put him to sleep and drove him out, this was a power transferred to him witnessed by destiny. Unless destiny itself suddenly collapses, he would not suffer any adverse effects. This power will only obey his commands, reinforcing his status. So would the world be destroyed and destiny collapse? Zeus thought it highly unlikely, and even if it did, much like the world of the foreign Divine King Odin, then whether he bears these consequences or not wouldn't matter. When the nest is overturned, no egg remains unbroken, and come that day, without paying these prices, he would only choose another way to die. He is the Divine King, a great one belonging to the present world. He is the one being who cannot possibly oppose the world, unless his kingship is threatened. To struggle against the present world essentially means undermining his own power. That's why I have to help him, not because Zeus is special to me. It's not for him. It's for our own selves. But the power of Typhon, it will likely disturb destiny, won't it? Lachesis seemed convinced, or perhaps because the cost was ultimately not hers to bear. She asked one last question, to which Atropos's answer left her with nothing more to say. Any way we look at it, an enemy in plain sight and constrained by the present world is far less threatening than a primordial deity whose identity we don't know. To guard against someone, we at least need to know who they are. It's a pity. For some reason, we can't see what the original destiny of the Chaos world was meant to be. Otherwise, if we could just compare, the person behind all this would stand out. Could it have been taken or erased by something? Yet, that shouldn't have happened. The voice gradually became indiscernible, and Atropos ultimately did not dwell on the matter. Nobody knows what happened before she was born. Such changes in the realm of destiny were beyond anyone's ability to explain. Atropos simply shook her head, then turned to her two sisters. Well, now you understand the seriousness of the situation. I know you don't feel much urgency yet, but don't be hasty. First go to Mount Nissa and wait for Typhon to come knocking. As for that mysterious person disrupting fate, next time, she said, when he once again affects destiny, you can experience for yourselves the sensation of that twisted fate acting upon one's consciousness. Lachesis, even you who have borne some cost, have never felt this before. On the other side of the void, an invisible passage linked two worlds together. In the cold and obscure space, stars gleamed faintly, but they seemed so dim in the presence of that blazing sun. Clang! The black scepter clashed with another sword. Buoyed by the void's power in the surrounding world, Ra's strength was not inferior to either of the two outsiders. However, with the home field advantage of the Heminu world, and the opponents numbering 2, there was no clear victor. Thus the scepter and sword blade merely grazed each other, then quickly withdrew. But even so, Ra's face still showed an unnatural shade of red. Nyx had vanished from sight in the void at that moment, like an elf wandering in the night. Even Lane wasn't sure what she was doing, but from Ra's occasionally rigid movements, it was evident she was exerting significant pressure. Upon his arrival, R.A. had been dressed in a knee-length robe woven with 4 colors, adorned with splendid and precious jewelry. Though he steered the sun in a humanoid form, his clothes were now slashed, his ornaments had fallen, and, with the rise of his power, his true essence was revealed. The body of a man with the head of an eagle, his keen eyes surveyed in all directions. Golden hair cascaded down his back, and atop his head a golden-crimson solar disk, which radiated a soft glow, continuously healing the wounds on Ra's body. He appeared to be in good shape with no visible injuries, but R.A. was well aware of the reason. If that foreign deity he was contending against wasn't protecting the orb of light behind him, he would never manage to be so at ease facing 2 enemies at once. This wouldn't last forever. He vaguely noticed that those orbs of light seemed to have signs of retreating. They weren't naturally present here, and now they were leaving. But I must gain something, R.A. thought. To him, eagle-eyed was not just an adjective, it was an accurate description. His eagle head subtly surveyed his surroundings, searching for a target he could strike at. These 2 enemies were too terrifying. R.A. found it difficult to defeat them, so he did not intend to reveal his hand to them. He needed a different target, one he would try to take with him. As for how to do that, naturally, he would use the divine artifact symbolizing the god of sun of the Heminu world, the vessel of Aeons representing the ultimate speed in the world. Chapter 544. Slay Me. The vessel of Aeons, true name Solar Barge. It was the chariot of the deity Ra, and also the embodiment of the sun in the eyes of the Egyptians. Vast as a city, yet able to shrink to a speck of dust. Golden red hues intermingled on its hull, which was inscribed with intricate runes, resembling both metal and wood in material. Its elongated and curved body arched high at both ends, like half of a disk, and the flames that burned atop it occupied the other half, together with the hull forming a complete circle. It had always been upon Ra, the sun disk that hung above the head of the deity. In times past, Ra would travel on the solar barge between Upper and Lower Egypt and the Netherworld, battling at night with the avatar of world chaos, the demon god Apep, and returning to the sky with the dawn. This bestowed upon the divine artifact the ability to travel with supernatural speed, linking the worlds. And as a divine artifact, although it was called a barge, it was clear that one did not necessarily have to be aboard to harness its effects. His mind made up, Ra showed no outward change. He maintained his previous demeanor, exchanging a couple of blows with the foreign deity, leveraging the terrain to his advantage. Then, at a certain moment, after another failed attempt to approach the orb of light behind the dark-clad deity, Ra suddenly surged with divine power. Without retreating to the sun, the disk above his head shone brightly. Although this riding method did not fully utilize the divine artifact's might, Ra still possessed unimaginable supernatural speed at this moment. It was like the Eastern myth of the golden crow transforms into a rainbow, and the eagle-headed Ra did bear some resemblance to it. In an instant, even Lane couldn't react in time as Ra swiftly approached the other orb of light, then lashed out with his arms, eagle claw-like, viciously snatching towards it. The vessel of Aeons? Lane was slightly surprised, the changes before him somewhat beyond his expectations. He had considered the possibility that Ra would retreat upon realizing he was outmatched, and that Ra might try to take something with him before leaving, but Lane didn't know what Ra's trump card could be. After all, although the legend of the solar barge was widely circulated in later generations, Lane had always thought it similar to the sun chariot of the Chaos World, a divine artifact specifically meant for the movement of heavenly bodies. The sun disk above Ra's head, previously, looked more like an ornament for healing injuries rather than a wooden ship providing extreme speed. Whoosh! Surprise was momentary, and Lane immediately took a step forward, space folding layer by layer before him, reducing the distance between him and Ra to a mere few inches. He didn't particularly care about the fate of the other chaos deities, but now the Heminu world was, to some extent, also his adversary, and Ra was the biggest local snake. To make things easier for himself later on, he naturally couldn't let Ra get what he wanted. Clang! Blade and scepter clashed, emitting a crisp ring, yet this time, the sword edge was only briefly slowed before continuing forward. It wasn't because Lane had been holding back all along, but rather Ra was using most of his strength to break the barrier protecting the other chaos deities. However, just as the sword's edge was about to touch Ra's body, the sun disk above his head tilted slightly, warding off the sharp edge that could tear through his divine body. Crack! With a sound of wood breaking, although in its own right it could serve as a divine artifact for defense, the solar barge was not particularly well suited for this purpose. A crack appeared on its surface, and what followed closely was a white palm thrusting out from the void. Bang! The palm clashed with the sun disk, the rising flames marking the palm with a red trace. But the solar barge fared even worse, creaking as though about to disintegrate any second. Caught it? Too bad. There's not enough time. What seemed like ages was but a moment. In such a short span, the divine artifact that had accompanied him for countless years was almost ruined, yet Ra's expression remained unchanged. His hand had reached into the orb of light, as if seizing a fragment of the foreign deity. However, as the power of the orb was not yet fully erased, and Lane and Nyx were close at hand, Ra refrained from greed and instead yanked forcefully. Tearing sound, something was immediately dragged down by Ra, feeling a power that, although foreign, somewhat resonated with his own. Ra did not hesitate and again spurred the solar barge to flee swiftly. He could feel that due to his recent actions, the laws of the foreign realm, which were countering the will of the Heminu world, erupted instantly. If he lingered any longer, he might not be able to escape. Humph! A soft grunt. A black ribbon stretched out in front of Ra, and further away, a dark sword light rose from the void. In a split-second decision, Ra chose not to conserve his strength to ward off the black sword, which clearly had stronger lethality, but instead gathered his divine power to tear through the ribbon and then charged headlong towards the sword light. Sizzle! The sharp edge penetrated his body, drawing strands of blood that vanished immediately under the forces of termination. Yet Ra's speed was undiminished. Just as he had surmised, this was a makeshift trap. Had he chosen to block the sword light, he would likely have been slowed by the black ribbon. A moment's delay could have had unforeseen consequences. The golden light streaked through the void, speeding back towards the approaching sun. The great orb too burst forth in an explosion to welcome its master's return. Even standing on the celestial body, Ra still didn't feel safe. With a forceful downward push, he accompanied the sun as it plunged back towards the boundless darkness that enveloped the world of Heminu. Chapter 545. Slay Me _2. Fortunately, the two deities from the foreign realm behind him did not pursue. As the sun was about to fall into the world, Ra, almost split in two by the giant bloody stripe, looked back. If they had given chase, Ra was prepared to destroy the sun if necessary to take one of them down with him. After all, this was the home field of Heminu world. Although the creative powers from both worlds were mutually neutralized, the destruction of the sun would be enough to cause the most fundamental turmoil in the world. At that moment, Ra did not know whether to regret that they did not fall into his trap or to be relieved that he didn't have to go to that extreme. Seeing the deities from the foreign realm looking back at him from a distance, Ra's face was cold and pale. This is just the beginning. Next time we meet, we will part in life or death, he said, turning to disappear into the darkness. Unlike the deities of Chaos World, the deities of Hemenu World grew old and died, and Ra was no exception. Having received a virtually unguarded fatal blow from an equal, a primordial god might have only weakened a bit and could fight again without hindrance, but Ra nearly forfeited half his life. Now, he needed to return to the place that made him feel most at ease, then figure out a way to heal his injuries, perhaps even attempt to go a step further. Before, Ra had little interest in such risky matters. He was the sovereign of the gods of Hemenu, the pioneer and guardian of Heliopolis, the pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, the eternal sun, but now it was different. Under the threat of the deities from a foreign realm, he feared he had to make some preparations in advance. Next time we meet, we indeed will part in life or death, Lane said. Standing in the void, Lane gazed at the sun sinking into the darkness. As the massive body of light descended, the surroundings once again returned to bone-chilling cold and deathly silence. A few orbs of light were still radiating, but it was now clear they were retreating. As Pallas entered Hemenu World through the gap Ra had used, the conflict from the inherent order of chaos was already much reduced, and Ra's recent actions had intensified this. He had forcibly taken a part of the essence of a deity. This was something that could never happen within Chaos World, or even within the reach of its power. But this was, after all, too close to a foreign realm, and the opposition was still fierce, so this impossible event occurred. Compared to the vastness of chaos, this loss was not significant, yet it was enough to make it furious. The ongoing conflict of order had been forcibly smoothened through an even greater expenditure of energy, leading the gods to return to their origins. And with this change, the invisible passage, linking the two worlds, also began to show signs of dissipating. This path, carved out of nothing, was only ever temporary. Once its purpose was fulfilled, it would naturally disperse, and both Lane and Nyx had come to realize this. The soul has been sent in, but I've almost lost all sense of him. It seems we must wait for a victor to emerge between the two worlds before this early gambit makes sense. Gathering the black sash that Ra had torn earlier, which was in fact a part of the sleeve from Nyx's black dress. It was somewhat unsightly from being scorched by the sun's energy, but under the wash of the Lady of the Night's power, it was gradually returning to its former state. I always feel like what you're doing is somewhat in vain. If we have to wait until this world's resistance is almost gone to see any effect, then that can hardly be called a gain, right? Never mind, time to go back. If we don't leave now, even the road will be gone. Indifferently straightening her cuff, smoothing out the last of the marks on it. Nyx turned to leave, but she soon realized that Lane had no intention of leaving yet. You go ahead, I want to stay here a while longer, he said. He waved his hand and continued to stare at the spot where Ra had disappeared. Stay a while. Do you have a way to travel between the two worlds after the power of the world vanishes? No. Shaking his head, Lane negated the possibility. In fact, as you can see, I never planned to go back. Exclamation point. Nyx's expression changed subtly as she carefully looked at Lane, whom she had known for many years. Not planning to go back. If he doesn't return now, then the next time would be when the two worlds are completely fused. She was unclear about what Lane intended to do by staying here, but it was definitely related to the soul from before. As for what he was going to do and what he was thinking, Nyx had never truly understood. So, this is your real purpose for calling me here, not for any hidden souls. After all, how could the power of a deity from outside the domain be of any use, separated by a barrier of a world? You also didn't call me here to fight against an enemy. If it's just that guy from earlier, it would be the same with or without me, since we can't kill it. You need me there in chaos, not here. You won't go back, but I have to. That's the reason you brought me here and then promised me benefits. Her tone gradually calming, Nyx observed Lane's silhouette. For some reason, looking at his figure, she suddenly felt an illusion. On him, the aspect of deity seemed to be rising. Then, on what basis do you think? I will do as you say. I can't guarantee. Let's say it's a personal request for a favor. You don't need to do anything for me, you just have to prevent others from doing anything to the spirit realm. Of course, I've made some preparations for unexpected incidents before my departure. Smiling, Lane didn't wait for Nyx's response. If she was willing to help, it was ideal. If not, it didn't matter. He had come to this world alone, so from beginning to end, he never counted on anyone but himself. He just raised the sword in his hand, and then struck down at himself. As the blade passed through his body, there was no spectacle of flesh and blood flying. Instead, it seemed as if something was being stripped away. In the eyes of Nyx, the Lane before her seemed more like a deity, not a deity of chaos, but like a divine being as indifferent as the world itself, overlooking the changes of all things. However, in contrast, there was the thing that was stripped away. This intangible entity seemed filled with all manners of joy, anger, sorrow, and passion, loves and hates, as if containing emotions that even the original Lane had never experienced. Seeing this, Nyx seemed to understand something. A deity cannot kill oneself, and you can't kill yourself either. So, you can't possibly separate your humanity from your divinity. It's meaningless. In the end, your connection cannot be severed. You are still one and the same. Yes, for now it is so. Grasping the uncertain substance, Lane casually flung it back towards where it came from. You should go back, Nyx. And I will stay here until the day of sunset, and then initiate the end of this world. Chapter 546. Amon and Infiltration. SSS. In the boundless darkness, a massive celestial body slowly moved. Like snowflakes under the blazing sun, the darkness retreated rapidly under the light. Yet, like magma deep in the sea, it seemed trivial for the vast and endless ocean itself, no matter how much seawater turned into steam. Seated atop the celestial body, the eagle-headed visage of Ra was no longer visible. As the power inside became calm, he once again took on a human-like form. In the world of Hemenu, deities in beast form often tended toward power, while human form leaned more towards rationality. Such was the law established since the dawn of creation. As his power stabilized, his wounds became evident. At this moment, Ra's eyes were downcast, staring at the sword scar that nearly split him in two. The authority of death crisscrossed on it, even spreading towards the rest of his divine body. It looked terrifying, but, in fact, it was not that serious. Ra was not without means to deal with it. After all, this was the power of an outsider deity, and once he returned to the domain of the Hemenu world, this inharmonious divine power lost much of its might. Even without considering this, the death divinity posed less of a threat to Ra than imagined. The reason was simple. Pure death had not completely stepped into the realm of greatness. Even though this authority was well suited for combat, it could not change the gap in status. If there were a better choice, Lane would not always use it for battle. However, even though Ra had many ways to drive away the traces of death divine power and then slowly heal his injuries, he made no reaction. He merely examined in silence his eroded divine body. Even though continuing like this, it wouldn't take long before he would experience true death. It is indeed surprising to me. Turns out our world is not the only one. Not only that, he is not even the most powerful. Letting go of his right hand, Ra temporarily shifted his gaze away from the wound and instead looked at the pair of wings he had torn off. Imbued with the outsider deity's source power, Ra did not know that in the long years to come, humans had put forth the geocentric and heliocentric models, believing that their position was the center of the universe. Yet in truth, they were no more than a minute existence in the vast cosmos. But despite the gap between gods and humans and the passage of time, at this moment, Ra indeed felt the same sensation. Dominating one's own territory for too long could inevitably give rise to such arrogant illusions. In later visual works, outsiders were often portrayed as the eventual targets of defeat, But Ra would not possess such unfounded confidence. If someone could traverse the vast distances unseen and arrive at your doorstep, that was already the clearest proof of the disparity in strength. His own world was at a disadvantage. Luckily, it wasn't completely defeated yet. It's just a pity that among this batch of outsider deities, there wasn't their god of sun. If their world has a sun, that is. If I could obtain the source power of another world's great sun, perhaps I could complete the rebirth in a more perfect manner. This now, light, is just an extension of my sun authority. Once I have deciphered the outsider laws it contains, I'll let it serve as a lighting tool on the solar barge. If things really don't work out in the future, it might even become my backup plan. Looking at the pair of wings in his hand, Ra made his decision. Just as the Hemenu world did not have a fire god, there was also no god of light. These fragmented divine authorities were attributed to the sun, together constituting the sun deity's power surpassing all gods throughout history. That was why Ra ultimately targeted an outsider god of light, because there indeed was an overlap in authority. Of course, among those outsider deities there was more than one with an authority similar to that of the sun. His final choice was this one mainly because the latter possessed the essence of a majestic eagle. God of light Apollo, he probably never knew that one reason why Ra targeted him was due to his transformation into a black eagle during the disaster caused by Typhon. Otherwise, for Ra whom to target would have remained an unknown. Pop! With a sound akin to a bubble bursting, the sun finally broke through the infinite darkness. The four-tiered structure of the Hemenu world, presented before Ra, was the infinite space and the primordial waters. The water, where reality and illusion intertwined, spread across the void, and the world was born from it. The creation deity of Hemenu legend, the former god of sun Adam, was born from the primordial waters, of course. Ra was certain that the so-called creator deity was but a boast of Adam's. Just as he is now proclaimed by the mortal realm to be the almighty creator, Ra was keenly aware of his strength or lack thereof. Thoth, my intellect, you have finally arrived. The sun traveled across the water, slowly dropping towards its original position, and at a certain moment, Ra suddenly turned around, looking towards a streak of light zooming towards him from afar. Just like Ra showing his beast head when exerting full force previously, the newcomer had a human body, but a crested ibis head. His curved beak resembled a new moon, yet he had a mane of black hair cascading down. In his palm, he held a clay tablet and writing stylus. Chapter 547 Amun and Infiltration _2. This was the symbol of Egyptian wisdom, the incarnation of the moon, the recorder of Heliopolis, and one of the most trusted confidants of the god of sun. Thoth was not one of the revered pillar deities, but the glory he actually enjoyed was no less than that of those principal gods. Especially since Isis had been stripped of her power by the god of sun and had died like a mortal, it was very likely that he would inherit some of her magic and knowledge and be promoted to become a new pillar deity. The most exalted god of sun, I do not possess supreme power like yours to easily penetrate the barriers of worlds. Even just coming here to this primordial water that bears all things has been quite difficult. Streams of light cascaded down, and the incessant bright flames on the sun parted to create a path for Thoth. Following the path and drawing closer, the god of wisdom bowed slightly, showing his respect to the god of sun. Supreme power. You see, I do not possess any supreme power. Spreading his hands, Ra revealed his terrible wounds to Thoth. However, across from him, the god of wisdom showed no signs of disdain or surprise. From the moment you chose to ride the sun away, allowing us to await you here, I knew you might face a difficult battle, Thoth said with a laugh, his slightly curved beak producing a light and elegant voice. I do not know what you will face, but since you are well prepared, everything must still be within your control. Ra nodded, looking back at the darkness behind him. Within control, perhaps at least for the time being. Thoth, tell me, what will happen to Heliopolis if I die? And what will happen among the gods? Some of them will fight over your inheritance, trying to become the new sun, while others will remain loyal to you, believing that even if the sun sets, it will ultimately rise again. Still smiling, Thoth calmly articulated his opinions. Ra listened quietly and finally nodded again. So, Thoth, I am going to die. He paused. Ra looked towards the vast primordial waters. My power as the sun will remain upon the sun, but no one will be able to touch it. Since I am not killed by anyone, no one can claim this power. In the future, a new god will inherit my legacy and become the new sun. At that time, you must remember to assist him in continuing to rule this world. What is his name? Thoth's expression did not change. I will become his servant the moment I learn of his existence, helping the new sun return to his rightful place. Amon, the god of Amon, that is his name. And in the future, he will inherit my power and become Amon-Ra-Adam. That is an unchangeable destiny. Very well. With a slight wave, Ra signified that Thoth could leave. Return to Heliopolis and then witness my sunset. Thoth, you will not disappoint me, will you? Of course, most exalted god of sun, your will shall be carried out. With a slight bow, just as he had come, Thoth turned into a stream of light and departed. And once again, there was only Ra left above the vast primordial waters. The sun continued to move slowly. Such a massive celestial body was destined not to be as nimble as a deity. Watching Thoth's figure disappear, Ra gazed silently for a while, and then placed his right hand on his chest. The next moment, a mysterious and unpredictable force was drawn out from his chest. It did not look like the power of the sun, and if observed closely, it even had some similar characteristics to the absolute void that existed outside the world. In the recent battle with the outer god, the Hemenu world naturally took its own side, providing Ra with the advantage of the land, which was the blessing of the outermost layer of the world, a portion of the absolute void. However, it seemed as though the battle had ended, but Ra still secretly retained some of this extremely special power. Amon. Uttering the name softly, the god of sun knew that Thoth must have understood his intentions. After all, this name was so unique and widely known. At the creation of the Hemenu world, the world was divided into 4 structures: absolute void, boundless darkness, endless space, and primordial waters, and in those years before the birth of the gods, that great and indescribable world will split transiently into incomplete personified avatars because of this division. The more powerful the force, the harder it was to manifest as a personality. That the Hemenu world was able to briefly reveal a personality image was, in fact, a display of its weakness. But none of this concerned Ra. All he knew was that in those earliest years, the world instinctively tried to have wisdom, so it birthed 2 personified avatars, one male and one female, from within the 4 structures. There were 8 in total, with the male gods having the bodies of men and the heads of frogs, and the female gods having the bodies of women and the heads of serpents. Of course, the world's attempt at personification ultimately failed. These personified avatars, collectively known as the 8 primordial spirits, and collectively called Hemenu, each had a name but ultimately failed to possess wisdom, and even these fragmented forms disintegrated as the strength of the world's forces grew. However, despite the failure, their brief existence did indeed bring some change to the world. For example, the original god of sun, Adam, who was consumed by Ra, was fostered by the male symbol of primordial waters, Nun, and the power gained by Ra today can be considered as bestowed by the male symbol of absolute space, Amon. Chapter 548 Amon and Infiltration _3. Of course, the true Amon god didn't actually exist. He was merely the personification of the world's failed creation, nothing more, at least until today. As for after, Ra looked at the power that legally belonged to Amon, which the world had proactively bestowed upon himself, and he finally made up his mind. Even the gods of Hemenu can die, and even grow old and pass away, including himself. As the supreme deity, Ra had been contemplating ways to solve this problem for a long time. Luckily, after a lengthy exploration, he did indeed find a way to change this outcome because Hemenu's sun held powers not possessed by chaos. It inherently possessed the capabilities of rebirth and renewal. He planned to be reborn in some way just as he was about to age, then, just like he had devoured Adam, allow the new self to consume the old self in order to avoid decay and death. He had even made arrangements long ago. Thebes, a place far from Heliopolis and outside the traditional system of Upper and Lower Egypt, was the place he had prepared for his reborn self. The new self would be the guardian deity birthed within this city-state and would silently replace the sun of old. The gods were likely still unresponsive, and a transformation of divinity had already been completed. However, that was before. Now, Ra felt he had a better option. If he could obtain the power of the foreign realm's god of sun, he would prefer to use another sun's power as the foundation to evolve his new self, ultimately harnessing the devouring ability among Hemenu's deities to commence a preliminary integration of the sun concepts from both worlds. Although this couldn't be done right now, the existence of the absolute void wouldn't be too far off. The reborn Amon would evolve with that power as the foundation and inherit one of the names of the 8 primordial spirits. As the highest of Hemenu, Ra wouldn't ordinarily conceive of the idea of devouring other deities, for the divine authority of those far inferior to the sun would not enhance his power but rather drag him down. However, this stood irrelevant in the face of the world itself. Even a trivial portion of the 8 primordial spirits' power would only serve to strengthen rather than weaken him. So I said, the next time we meet, it will be a matter of life and death, outer god. Except, it will be you who dies, and I who lives. Clenching his fingers tightly, Ra didn't rush to begin his rebirth. The death of the sun required a grand ritual, and he also wanted to see, when he died, what choices the deities dwelling in Heliopolis would make. Since he was about to confront an external enemy, no matter how he considered it, he would need some cannon fodder. Souls floated, traveling through layers upon layers of portals. Roaming through the primordial water, Pallas's soul was gradually restored. Moving beyond the outer shell of the world, it began to drift toward the banks of the Nile River. There lived beings closely related by blood, and though he had not yet come to life, he instinctively began drawing closer to that side. TSK, to think I would actually wait until now. A fair and slender arm reached out from one side, gently grabbing the soul's arm. Under the lush folds of the skirt, the girl who seemed cherished by all creatures smiled, observing the spiritual body that hadn't entirely shed its foreign air yet. Like the previous Io, another outsider had arrived. Only this one seemed to have been actively sent in by a foreign realm's existence. Undergo 10 rebirths among a race with blood of the foreign realm flowing in their veins to erode the abnormal aura, then integrate fully into this world? This plan began with Io all those years ago. Such a prolonged scheme. With a smile curving her eyes, Isis laughed lightly. Ever since the sun left not long ago, she had secretly departed from her magically constructed shelter to the place most inhabited by Hebrews. All of the gods were focused on the departure of the sun. The all-seeing Ra was no longer present, and no one possessed the capacity to discover her. And so, quite silently, Isis happened upon an outsider from a foreign land for the second time, and on both occasions, she was the only one to find them. Chapter 549. This is Chaos Evil. The hem of the skirt swept just past the knee, with loose tassels swaying in the wind. Gazing far into the distance at the gnome on the ground below, Isis admitted that her encounter with a soul from the foreign realm this time was more a matter of luck. Unlike Io, the princess from another world had some kind of connection with her from the start, and it was indeed the mission bestowed by the fate of chaos for her to take Isis's place. So, during the last time, she easily detected the other's arrival and actively concealed Io's traces. After all, unlike the soul with half its origin in the Hemenu world, the mortal princess of Pislacius was truly an otherworlder, and if Isis hadn't covertly intervened, the gods of Egypt above and below would have already become aware of the existence of the foreign realm. Although the outcome was favorable, it was this very action that caused Lane to misjudge the situation. He had thought that Io had been discovered long ago, and it was precisely because of this that Ra had come to understand the existence beyond their domain, so he only fashioned half of Pallas' spiritual body. Lane was also unclear about the existence of a lineage within the Hemenu world that still held the divine blood of chaos, which could serve as a vessel for the soul. If he had known this earlier, perhaps a lot of trouble could have been avoided. Let's give it a try. Her gaze shimmered slightly, as wisps of lush green light began to emerge around Isis's fingertips. She wanted to see if she could use the remaining authority of life within her to directly fashion a body for this soul that wouldn't face rejection. If successful, she, the goddess of life from Hemenu, might well be recognized by chaos. Why is this? The soul from the foreign realm is actually being rejected by the fate of its own world. Her fingers were about to touch the ephemeral spiritual body, but the next moment, a premonition of impending disaster flashed through Isis's heart. It was as if the touch of her finger would bring about some irreversible consequence, causing her to freeze right there on the spot. Perhaps it was her experience from last time, or maybe it was because the power of chaos simply did not hold sway in the foreign realm, but Isis quickly identified the root of the problem. The soul from another world seemed not to be recognized by its original world, at least not as alive. And so if Isis actually gave it a new birth, it would likely bring her more harm than good, and could lead to even more dreadful consequences. For example, if the fate of chaos wanted him dead, but this was the turf of the other world. Eliminating the possibility that fate would recede due to this, it was highly likely that it would pour in more power without regard to the cost, in order to break through the barriers of the world. And clearly, the Hemenu world would not allow itself to be invaded like this, to let the power of a foreign realm enter its body, no matter what the purpose. In such circumstances, it would certainly fight back with all its might. So this is the plan of the deities from another world, using a special soul not recognized by the fate of its own world, to incite a more brutal and costly conflict between the wills of two worlds, compressing an upheaval that might have lasted tens of thousands of years into 1,000, and in the process harming the wills of both worlds. No wonder a transmigration of 10 lifetimes is needed. This isn't just to wear away the traces of the other world, but also to make this collision last as long as possible. Because before the final lifetime arrives, this being from another world can't actually be considered to have fully completed the transmigration. He only lived halfway, so the world will keep pouring in strength, attempting to kill him. Until he is truly born, fate has to acknowledge that the dead have come back to life. Pursing her lips, Isis glanced at the soul and finally let go of her hand. Unlike with Io this time, she didn't dare to act rashly. Tisk, divine providence. Looking up at the sky, in that moment, Isis happened to see the sun slowly re-emerging from the horizon, but there was something slightly amiss about it. Despite being midday, it gave off the impression of an evening sunset. Nevertheless, upon seeing this scene, Isis merely shook her head. Wisdom is truly the most precious treasure in the world of mortals. Without it, even an existence like divine providence would be manipulated at will. With a light lift of her eyebrows, as a flash of insight passed, Isis's form also disappeared from view. Ra had returned, and she dared not underestimate him, a being who could stand upon the sun and overlook the world. No matter what he was up to, as long as he had the spare attention for this world, she would stay hidden. One wonders, on the day this world reaches its end, what fate awaits that undying sun. Chaos, Northern Lands. Several days had elapsed since Mount Olympus was breached and the gods fled in all directions. At least, that's how it seemed to Typhon. Because of the distortion of chronology, within a very short time, different temporal anomalies emerged across the whole of the present world. Some areas experienced hundreds of years in the span of a few days, and at the far reaches of the stars and oceans, even more time had passed. However, Typhon was oblivious to this, as the temporal changes were a consequence of the struggle between fate and order, and they hadn't affected the king of all monsters. Thus, wherever Typhon traveled, time passed as usual. It only remembered visiting many places and seeing many forms of life in the past few days. It threatened every being it encountered to tell it the way to kill the divine king, but none could provide an answer. Chapter 550. This is Chaos Evil _2. And so, a black storm swept across the sky, but the vast expanse of stars was void of any presence. The gods of stars had long since hidden themselves. Impatient, Typhon headed for the sea, but apart from some unintelligent ocean creatures, he could not find a single sea god. Now, he had come once more to the desolate northern lands. The penetrating black wind was destroying everything in its path as Typhon wantonly unleashed his rage. It was not until he reached a towering mountain peak that he finally spotted an old and terrifying deity. "Who are you? What deity do you preside over?" The black storm gradually dissipated outside Mount Nissa, as dragon heads peered out one after another. The monstrous figure with the body of a snake, the torso of a man, and the head of a dragon looked at the old woman. His massive voice echoed between the mountains. "I am Atropos, the deity who governs fate, or rather, its messenger." Fate! The dragon heads shook as if contemplating what that was. But Typhon's eyes soon shone with light again. This was no exaggeration, as the king of all monsters' eyes truly ignited with a black flame capable of destroying everything, instantly burning a large hole into Mount Nissa. "I have heard of fate, this power that can threaten the divine king. So tell me, fate, how can I kill the divine king?" "I thought you would be a bit more polite, Typhon, at least towards fate." Boom! With a sweep of his paw, Atropos's words were cut off in her throat. Typhon grasped the fate in his hand and watched her skeleton creak and groan. "Tell me how to kill Zeus, and I will kill you last. That is my courtesy to you." Thud! He tossed her aside carelessly, and Atropos crashed against the rugged mountainside of Mount Nissa, scattering stones in all directions. Clearly, the fate had not anticipated such treatment. She even thought she might have misunderstood Typhon's intent. Cough, cough. "What are you saying? Kill me last? So you mean to say, if I really can tell you how to kill a deity, you are going to kill all the deities including me, just killing me last?" "Correct. This world does not need the undying," Typhon declared, his dragon head booming with no hint of awareness of how ludicrous and chaotic his threats were. "So now, tell me how to kill Zeus, and I will grant you a swift end last." Somewhat speechless, threatening an immortal deity and trying to obtain the method to kill gods, in exchange for being the last one to be killed, Atropos didn't know what to say. If she hadn't come for this very reason from the start, Typhon probably would never get an answer from anyone. But it didn't matter anymore. It was easier to deceive a fool, and she didn't even need to look for a reason. Shaking her head slightly, she struggled to stand up from the ruins and showed an ugly smile. "To kill the divine king, you found the right person. As the fate, I indeed have a way to help you kill him. But I wonder if you can bear the cost?" "What cost?" At first, he asked a question, but then Typhon's 100 heads danced wildly. "There is no cost I cannot bear. Stop the nonsense. Tell me, how should the divine king die?" The chaotic clamor of the 100 heads made it impossible to discern what he wanted to say, only evoking irritation and vexation. Atropos paid no heed, simply fumbling with trembling arms in her robe for a while before extracting something. "Fate. Only fate can decide the life and death of the divine king. You know that." She held out the object to Typhon. "I cannot help you, but you can help yourself." Typhon took from Atropos's hand what was a fruit. That was a rotting fruit, half as pristine as new, half black and brown as if chewed and decayed by worms. Disgusting pus dripped from its surface, as if it were corrosive in nature. However, its scent was not as one might expect, for under Typhon's keen sense of smell, it actually exuded an enticing fragrance. It reached the soul irreplaceable. "This is fruit of one day, the fruit of destiny. It is also the personification of your connection with Zeus. It can determine your fate, decide your life or death." Even Typhon, creature of chaos, sensed the absurdity. Could a bizarre fruit determine its fate? "Yes, it will determine your fate." Atropos smiled, then pointed to herself. "Typhon, you've seen more than one deity, haven't you? Have you seen what they look like? Is there any among them who possesses such an old and ugly face as mine?" Typhon did not respond. Indeed, it had seen none, and the fate before it seemed an exception. And as Typhon watched, Atropos continued, "This is Backlash Typhon. The fate of the world was interfered, and the backlash fell upon me, resulting in such a reaction. This is the world's reproach, and there's also a share from the divine king. He devoured his own wife Métis, trying to prevent the birth of a true god. And he actually succeeded. The destiny of Pallas was killed. You don't understand this, but it doesn't matter. In short, he must pay the price for this, and the punishment given by destiny is this fruit. It is fruit of one day. Anyone who eats it will possess the power to completely defeat the divine king within one day. Even the laws of the current world will not interfere with you, but you have only one day. If you can't do it within a day, then you will pay an equivalent price. From then on, you will never be his match again. Ha ha ha. Good. Over 100 dragon heads emitted a strange laugh, and without hesitation, Typhon swallowed the tempting fruit in one gulp. But the next moment, black flames flickered again in its 200 eyes as it glared at Atropos, as if looking at a dead person. This is your and Zeus's destiny, your battle with the divine king, and even after consuming it, you cannot kill me. Watching the dangerous gaze of the 100-headed dragons and serpents, Atropos could surely guess what lay in the other's thoughts. Yet, she merely shook her head and offered an explanation. Then the next moment, several dragon heads surged forward, tearing at the body of the Fate. But just as Typhon had once done to every other god, no matter how much force it applied, Atropos simply would not die, continuing to calmly watch it instead. It's no use, Typhon. Go do what you must, you have only one day. Actually, I thought you would have waited to eat the fruit of one day after meeting Zeus. No need, old thing, who do you think I am? One day is enough. I am the king of all monsters, Typhon. Boom! After throwing Atropos back onto Mount Nysa, Typhon's dragon wings vibrated, lifting its vast body into the sky. It temporarily gave up dealing with this fate, though it felt she might have other fruits of one day for the other gods. But it decided to settle things with Zeus first. The divine king was the only one who posed even a slight threat to it, and this would also be a test of the fruit of one day's power. If it could succeed, there would be time to return later. The black storm promptly disappeared in the direction of what once was the Carycian mountain range, leaving only Atropos, bleeding and lying in the ruins. After a long time, she finally climbed out of the pit. Such a madman. Dies deservedly.